Hello everyone, welcome to Psychology 303, Analysis of Everyday Behavior. And today we're going to continue talking about reinforcement. So in the previous video we talked a little bit about some of the types of reinforcement. Positive versus negative reinforcement, social versus automatic, etc. Now I want to talk a little bit about some of the characteristics of reinforcement that make it more or less potent. So what are some of these characteristics? Well, first of all, reinforcement is most effective when it happens right after the ideal behavior, the desirable behavior. Think about situations in which the reinforcement does not come right after the behavior. It'd be difficult to tell if that behavior is something you want to increase or decrease. If you tell a joke to someone and they don't laugh at it right away, you're probably going to stop telling that joke as often because you think others don't find it very funny. Imagine if people did find it funny but didn't laugh until a minute or 2 minutes after the joke. Well, the individual, the target individual trying to change their behavior, wouldn't have very good information on whether or not they should continue that behavior. So that's why immediacy is an extremely important quality of effective reinforcement. Reinforcement is also most effective. The behavior is reinforced after every instance of it, and only after every instance. Imagine if you're trying to turn on your TV and that power button doesn't turn it on every time. Then you're probably going to be less likely to press that button. Imagine if you try to start your car and it doesn't happen. Imagine if your car just randomly starts sometimes even when you don't press the button. Then again, that behavior is not going to be reinforced very effectively. So contingency is also very important. It's also important to understand that there are individual differences in terms of the potency of certain reinforcers. Some people really like chocolate. Some people, surprisingly, don't like chocolate. I'm kind of one of them. Please don't hate me for not liking chocolate that much. But what that means is that you have to, again, all of this is about tailoring the intervention to this specific person who wants to change their behavior. So it would be silly to use chocolate as a reinforcer for someone who doesn't like chocolate. Maybe they like Skittles more. So you'd want to use that as a reinforcer of a certain behavior rather than chocolate. So it's important to understand that. And lastly, it's important to understand that magnitude of the reinforcement can play a large role. The more of the reinforcer you give, the stronger the reinforcement is, basically. So, for example, if you give someone $5 instead of $1 for performing a behavior, they're going to be even more likely to continue to perform that behavior in the future. There are also some important kind of quirks of reinforcement known as motivating operations. And what they are basically environmental factors or antecedents that alter the value of a reinforcer. So we may be using food as a reinforcer, or this kind of positive consequence, for example. Well, food is only going to work if the person is hungry. If a person just ate a large meal, maybe they just ate a whole bunch of chocolate and can't even bear to think about chocolate, then chocolate's not going to be a very good reinforcer. In terms of motivating operations, we can have establishing operations or abolishing operations. Establishing operations, or EOs, make the reinforcer more potent. So food will be more potent if the individual is hungry. Drinks will be more potent if the individual is thirsty. A lot of times you'll see some bars or kind of establishments like that put a bowl of nuts or peanuts, for example, on the bar to try and get people to buy more drinks. So if the person's eating nuts, eating salty foods, they're going to get thirstier and they're going to be more likely to buy a drink as a result. So again, trying to increase the likelihood of purchasing behavior by using an establishing operation, by making the person thirstier in the first place. One important thing about an EO is the term deprivation. So when a person has been deprived of food or deprived of water or maybe deprived of money, each of those different reinforcers are going to be especially potent. So depriving someone of that reinforcer before using it to increase behavior is an example of an EO. The abolishing operation, on the other hand, does the opposite and makes a reinforcer less potent. So if you're using food as a reinforcer, Giving it to someone who's extremely full is not going to be very effective. If you're using money, giving it to someone who's very rich is not going to be very effective. And just as we had deprivation, we can also have satiation. Satiation is an AO. So if a person goes on a binge eating rampage and then burgers are used to try and increase behavior, then they're not going to be very effective. And the examples I've been using for motivating operations, or MOs, have been focused on positive reinforcement, but this also works for negative reinforcement. You can imagine the situation I talked about before where a loud noise is used or kind of removed as a way of increasing a certain behavior. You can imagine someone who maybe has a headache. That would be an establishing operation. That's going to make this loud noise more potent and increase the likelihood of the behavior occurring. Or maybe a person's wearing earplugs or noise-canceling headphones. That's going to be an abolishing operation. It's going to make that loud noise less potent or less likely to change behavior for the better. So those are some examples of motivating operations, especially important to keep in mind, again, when you're tailoring your intervention for that specific person. But another thing to consider, and probably one of the most important decisions, is what schedule of reinforcement to use. So what do I mean by schedule of reinforcement? Well, I talked earlier about contingency being a very important part of reinforcement, where you want the reinforcer to occur after every instance of behavior. And that is an example of a continuous schedule. It's especially ideal for acquiring a new behavior, or when a behavior is first being learned, say for example, a child learning words or maybe signs to communicate with a parent. Reinforcing each of those behaviors is great if you want them to learn this. But for maintaining behavior, for continuing behavior, you want to at some point shift to an intermittent schedule, where behavior is not reinforced after every single instance of the behavior occurs. You want to do this occasionally. And exactly how that plays out, exactly what I mean by occasionally, can depend on the style of reinforcement that you want to use. And there are 4 main schedules, main intermittent schedules that are used. We can have a fixed ratio schedule. That's where a reinforcer appears after a set number of behaviors have occurred. So if the child says please 3 times when asking for something from their parents, they'll be rewarded a cookie, and every 3 times that'll happen. And that number is consistent. It's always 3 times. Another example of this would be in video games. We see fixed ratio schedules used all the time. You know that how much progress you need to make to get to the next level, and you behave in certain ways that will get you to that next level. That behavior is being reinforced. We can have a variable ratio schedule. That's again where we're counting how many behaviors are occurring, but this time the individual doesn't know how many times they need to perform. It's a random number of responses. Great examples of this are slot machines. You know what behavior you need to do, you know you need to keep doing it, but you don't know how many times you need to pull the lever to get that positive reinforcement, to win that money. You keep pulling the lever or pressing the button until that behavior is reinforced. Telemarketers also end up kind of following this variable ratio schedule where they don't know how many people they need to call to try and sell a product, but after a certain number of behaviors, they will get reinforced, or that behavior will get reinforced rather, and they will end up making a sale. And we can have a fixed interval schedule. Instead of focusing on the number of behaviors, we focus on the amount of time that passes. So a reinforcer appears after a set amount of time has elapsed, and then the first time a behavior occurs after that time has elapsed, the reinforcer appears and that behavior is reinforced. A great example of this would be during workouts. There's a water break that occurs. You know that there's a certain amount of time where you need to be working out, say, 10 minutes, and then you know that you're going to get that reinforcement after the 10 minutes in the form of a water break. This is the schedule that probably occurs in the real world the least amount of time. It's probably the least frequently used. And lastly, we have variable interval schedules. This is when, again, we're focusing on an amount of time, but similar to variable ratio, that amount of time is not fixed, it's not set, it's variable, it's random. So a great example of this would be maybe a child is playing nicely with friends, and then randomly after a period of time, a teacher or a parent says, "Good job, you're doing a great job playing." So they get kind of attention and positive reinforcement for that behavior, but it's kind of sporadic, it's very unpredictable, and the children are going to continue behaving because they don't exactly know when the behaviors are going to occur. So those are the different schedules. For the fixed ratio and the fixed interval, we tend to see a dip in responding after that period of time or number of behaviors have occurred. That's basically because people are able to pick up on, all right, I need to perform 5 behaviors, or I need to perform behaviors within this 30 minutes, and then I know I'm not going to be reinforced for a while. So we tend to see dips in behavior right after the reinforcement occurs for those fixed schedules. And ideally, you want to focus in on a variable interval schedule. This is the schedule where there tends to be the most steady rate of responding. And there tends to be behaviors steadily occurring, primarily because people don't know when the reinforcement is going to occur. So people keep trying, like the example with the children, the kids are going to try and keep playing nicely in appropriate ways in the hopes of getting that positive reinforcement from teachers or parents. Another important thing to consider are what are known as concurrent schedules of reinforcement. That's when in certain situations, different types of behaviors are reinforced in the same way. So a lot of the times when we talk about reinforcement, when we talk about some of these positive outcomes, especially in children, attention is a prime example of a reinforcer. Children do things all the time to try and get attention from teachers or parents. But you can imagine in a classroom setting, there are many different ways of getting attention. You can get attention by raising your hand, or you could get attention by being disruptive in class. And this is an example of concurrent operants. Concurrent types of behavior that could either occur in this environment that both lead to the same reinforcer. So in these situations, it can be very tricky if you're the teacher or the parent. You obviously want to reinforce the behaviors that are ideal, hand raising, and try not to reinforce the behaviors that are undesirable. That's kind of creating a ruckus in class. And how people generally decide what behavior to use to get to that reinforcer follows several different steps. They generally tend to behave in ways that have more frequent reinforcement, so that are more consistently reinforced. They tend to perform the behaviors that are reinforced at a greater magnitude, that have the better payout, so to speak. They tend to follow the behaviors that are reinforced immediately. And they tend to behave in ways that are less effortful, that require less response effort. So that's all I have today on reinforcement. Hopefully that gives you a good idea of what we're talking about when we use that term in class for the rest of the quarter. Thank you for your time and attention, and I will see you all in the next video.